Good day, fellow champions of inclusion. I am A. Ron, and this is the Inclusive Dad Podcast, where we explore inclusion and make it practical. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe, rate, or review the show on your favorite platform. We truly appreciate your feedback and would be honored if you shared the podcast with friends and family who might benefit. If you want to support us in our mission, please click on the link in the show description. Today, my guest is Nicolas Comstock. Welcome to the show.
Welcome to I almost thought this was my podcast. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So first off, why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Well, Aaron, I am 34 years old. I live in Columbus, Ohio. I've been in Columbus for 5 years. I've been in the state of Ohio for 9. It's hard to believe. My family and my parents and I moved here in 2015. They live about an hour and 20 minutes away from me, in my opinion, not far enough. So yeah, they live in a town called Crestline, and I'm all the way over here in Columbus, the big city. I grew up 20 minutes outside of Chicago, so you could never take the city out of me. I will say, where my parents are and where my grandparents live, they live in a nice country area, and it's nice and quiet. I have come to like that, but I still enjoy the big city. So that's why I'm here in Columbus.
That's awesome. Why did you move from near Chicago to Ohio?
Well, that's a little bit of an interesting story. We could probably invite Mari Polpich to help tell that story. So I went to a big mega church that they call in Northwest Indiana, and the pastor got in some legal trouble, stuck his hand in another a young person's cookie jar, and went to jail for that. And so my parents, after about a year, decided to move here, and I'm so glad they did, because it gave me a better chance at life. So yeah, that's the short end of it.
That's the short end of it? Gotcha. Yeah. When you applied to be on the podcast, I asked all my guests what your definition of inclusion is. So this is what you submitted. Inclusion for me is not including me because of my disability, but rather what I bring to the table. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Absolutely. And I probably should have put just because there. And, I dictate everything, and I didn't think about it. But I am all for inclusion, that everybody should have access to the same things. Like, I've heard you talk on your podcast about how you've had to go meet with your daughter's teachers to make sure they had the right desk in the right classrooms. And I heard you talk about, how your daughter was performing somewhere and you had to literally physically carry her up on stage, and that is not okay. So in that instance, I support inclusion, everybody having access to every part of everything. But I feel like the world has somewhat of a messed up, definition of inclusion, where we have to have everybody a part of everything because of their disability, because they're disabled, or because of their sexual orientation, or because of their race. And I don't want you to have me a part of your table or your organization just because I'm physically in a wheelchair. I want you to have me a part of your organization or a part of what you're doing because of what I bring to the table, because of my ideas, because of how I can enhance what you're doing. Things like that. Don't just bring me to the table so you can get a pat on the back and say, oh, look, they have someone with a disability on their board.
Right.
Look at how inclusive they are. Well, it doesn't mean that you're inclusive, especially if you don't allow someone that is with a disability or a different race or a different sexual orientation to have a voice. You're just there because of their label.
Right.
So yeah, that's what that means.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So what came to mind is so the story you talked about, I share where I had to carry my daughter up on the stage. I'm actually on a committee now for that with that organization. They're
Right.
working on doing like a upgrade remodels. So I'm in conversations with that. As part of that, they want to start like a committee more on how to to make their activities more inclusive, more accessible. So what something I thought came to mind for me was that the people that they sent the email to, none of us have have a disability. So in that situation, I wanted to reach out to some people I know that identify as have a disability to get somebody with a disability on the board, because for me it was like, I mean, everybody on this board, none of us have disabilities. We work for organizations, or I mean, I have a daughter with a disability, but none of us have one. So I felt like we should probably have somebody with a disability on the board. Do you see like a difference between that than what you talked about? Just, hey, we need to have somebody with a disability so we look better. I mean,
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely, Aaron.
okay,
It is very important to have someone, especially if you're looking to build something for them, for other people that are in that community. It's
right,
very important to have someone on that board or in that organization that is living the life that you're looking to try to support.
yeah,
And so for them to be able to say, oh, like in your daughter's case, for her to be able to say, oh, this is maybe too narrow, I can't get my chair
yeah,
through here, or this ramp needs to be wider because I'm afraid to go down and I'm afraid I'll tip, if it's not wide enough or
yeah,
whatever. So it's very important, absolutely, to have your daughter and people like her on projects like that to really speak up and say, no, you're not thinking
yeah,
broadly enough.
yeah,
Yeah, so absolutely.
yeah. Because I can relay my stories like I carried her up on stage and how that impacts me. But I mean, I'm not in a wheelchair myself. I'm not experienced from that perspective. So I feel like I agree with you that we need to have. I think there's a saying, "Nothing about us without us," or something that I've heard many times. So I feel that that makes sense to me. Um, has your definition of like inclusion changed over time, or has that kind of always been how you felt about it?
Well, I really felt this way after 2018. I really started to feel this way because, like I said, I've been in Ohio for 9 years. And here in Ohio, I don't know how Minnesota does it. Um, our services are funded. A big portion of them are funded by county boards. So I'm here in Franklin County, and I believe the county boards do 60% of the funding, and then the state does 40%. It may
Okay.
be switched around, but it's still
Okay.
a 40-60 take there.
Yeah.
So Ohio passed a law a couple years ago that stated they have to have somebody from every county that has a disability on their board of directors. Well, before that law was even passed, I believe I was one of the first uh, people to be put on the board of directors at the time in Richland County, because that's where I was at receiving services. And I got a call from my case manager's supervisor who oversees my services. And she said, Nick, I have to talk to you for a second. I said, okay, what's going on? I had a tight relationship with those at the Richland County Board. And at the time, uh, the current superintendent of the county board was leaving and another superintendent was coming in. And she said one of the changes that the new superintendent wants to make is that she wants to put someone with a disability on our board of directors, and she would like that person to be you. And when I got that call, I remember actually when I got that call and I hung up with her, I remember actually crying.
Right.
Because somebody actually of really big significance wanted to know what I thought about the disabled world, about how we perceive our services, about how it affects us every day. And I'm going to get to be a voice for those who don't have one in the disabled community. So this was a big deal for me personally.
Right.
So we go through the process and everything. It gets major press. I have to go into what they call an executive session with the board members. There was another lady that was put on the board. She was a parent of someone with a disability, and she and I were interviewed at the same time, separately, of course. And the board members asked me, and they said, Nick, what is your plan for being on the board? Why should we pick you as a board member? And I said, well, I want to advocate for caregivers to receive better pay. I want to give a voice to those who don't have one. And I feel like if I'm sitting on the board of directors, I can have a chance to say, wait a minute, we shouldn't do this because this is going to affect this if we do that. And so they said, absolutely, wonderful. And I was called a couple weeks later and I was appointed to the board, and it was a big deal. Front page news, Richland County News Journal, all the newspapers, Columbus Dispatch picked it up. I did local television. Newspapers came to my residence at the time to interview me. It was a big deal. So on January 24th, 2018, me and this other young lady was sworn in as a board member by the county commissioner, and I started doing local press for them, and everybody started asking me, Nick, what do you want to do as a board member? And I'd go around and give the same answers. And I went into the board superintendent, and I asked her. I said, "Is there more of a detailed answer that I can give, to the media? Like, what can I say?" And the board superintendent said, "Well, you really can't advocate as a board member. You really can't have an opinion. You really can't go in and say, I think we should do this because it's gonna benefit me as someone receiving services." Now, Aaron, I understand that I cannot go in as a board member and say, I want to spend $1 million because I know it's going to benefit me, and I know it's going to benefit the other people around me. I know I can't go say that. But to say that I can have a voice and speak to, the issues that I thought I was brought on to speak to, which is what people with disabilities struggle with every day, I was like, why the hell am I here?
Right.
So I was on that board for 18 months, and then I moved to Columbus, unfortunately, right before the pandemic happened. So I moved in August of 2019, and then in March of 2020, everything shut down and the world changed forever. But yeah, that's when I got my definition of inclusion is I don't want to be brought on something just because I have a label and it's going to make you look good as an organization. I want to be brought on because you think what I say and what I can bring to the table brings actual value. It just doesn't make you look good as an organization. Yeah. So that's when I got that definition.
Yeah, that makes complete sense to me. Part of I don't have a disability, but for me, similar situations where, people ask your opinion or, they invite you to be on something just to, like you're saying, to find out that they really don't want your opinion or want you to share stuff. So it's a frustrating position overall to be in too. Cause like, why am I even here if I can't like talk about what I want to or like help people? That's why I want to be here. So that's
Right.
frustrating.
Right. So it was very frustrating. Um, but I still put it on my
Yep.
resume when
Sure.
hey, if you're going to use me for front page, I'm going to use you.
Yeah.
So yeah,
That's cool.
and I've done several different speeches before at the
Okay.
state house
Sure.
to you know get them to pass a bill to raise the pay for caregivers. I think now we're at $17 an hour or $18 an hour.
Right.
Then we have a system here in Ohio, depending on how long you've been in the field. If you take an extra training every year, you get like a dollar or two, depending on how long you've been in the field, based on how long you've been in the field.
Gotcha.
So yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about like, have you always been included? Just how, I mean, like growing up in school, like that kind of stuff?
I have not always been included, and school was one of the hardest things for me, Aaron. I went through 2 years of kindergarten, and then my parents decided to homeschool the rest of my family for a period of time. So I ended up sitting in front of the TV a lot. Um, I don't know why, but I didn't go to school again until the 6th grade. I grew up at a mega church, as I said in the beginning, and when I was in the 6th grade, one of the last ministries that my pastor started before he passed away was a special needs school, a special needs class. And so my parents felt it prudent to put me in there. And to be honest with you, it was like a glorified babysitting service. I didn't get an education. I got a certificate of completion, which basically means nothing. So I don't have a high school diploma. Um, I spent a lot of time watching episodes of Reading Rainbow and going on field trips and going on literal field trips and then going on imaginary field trips and eating donuts and learning how to make Papa John's pizza and all,
Hmm.
stuff that is not helping me to this day. I did integrate in some of the classes, but a lot of the teachers, I just sat there. Um, they didn't have me do a lot of the work that the kids did. A couple of the teachers did when I would go in and say, "Hey, I actually have a brain. I need you to put me to work."
Right.
And so I did some of the work that the kids did on paper. I did it orally because I have trouble reading and stuff like that. I have octave atrophy in both of my eyes, which causes me to be legally blind.
Okay.
So I've always had trouble reading. And so a lot of my stuff I do orally. And
Sure.
so I did some of that when I was in high school, but I didn't actually get any credit for it. So yeah, I wasn't included in a lot of stuff, like even the youth group and going on teen activities and all that
Sure.
stuff. My school, as big as it was, in the church, they didn't have like vans for people to go
No.
places with disabilities. They didn't have handicap buses. The buses that they did have weren't really handicap accessible. They only had buses for the nursing home ministry and stuff that was used on Sunday for church. But they didn't have any access for me to go to like summer camp, or we had something every year called school camp where the third week of September the whole school would go to school camp with each other. The whole high school would go to school camp. I never got to participate in that because it just wasn't accessible. And I felt left out growing up of a lot of things. And so, yeah.
So it sounds like you went to a private school. Is that correct?
I did. I
Okay.
went to a private Christian
Private, okay.
school. Uh, they had no idea what an ISP is.
Right.
Um, I don't think they wanted to do what they call an ISP. I think they
Right.
wanted to do their own thing, which is what a lot of mega churches and private Christian schools want to do. They don't want anybody coming in and telling them how to run their program.
Well, that's kind of an important thing because, like, my daughter went to public schools. So in the public schools, since they receive federal funds, they have to follow the federal laws on that stuff. Whereas, at the private schools, I don't think have to. So there's an interesting.
Yeah, it is
Thing
interesting.
there.
Yeah, but unfortunately, and I don't know, you can talk about this through your experience. I've heard that a lot of special ed programs are sadly the same. It's more of a glorified babysitting service. I don't know if that's how your daughter experienced it or if she
I
actually
mean,
vacation.
part of it. Part of the reason I got into the inclusion piece of it is that, growing up, I don't recall the word disability being used. Don't remember seeing anybody in a wheelchair, anything about it. So once my daughter was 3 months old, diagnosed with epilepsy, later cerebral palsy, it was all new to me. So
Yeah,
since it was new to me, you rely on the school to like tell you the stuff that's best for your child, which meant for her because of her, she uses a wheelchair. Actually, has had cataracts in both eyes, so lenses removed. So she qualifies under multiple categories, and because of that, she was bused like across town to the program where kids like her should go. Which
yeah,
at the time I didn't know any better, so that's where she went until one day I went to eat lunch with her, and other kids like in kindergarten, first, second grade were already folding towels, and I was like, hold on a second, why are they in this room folding towels? Why aren't they in math class and reading class? Like, what's going on? Well, then kind of led down that path. So I would say in that situation, it was probably more of already teaching life skills for one, but also more of a babysitting, service.
yeah,
And then once she was out of like the general ed classes, trying to get her back in, now there was like these weird other hoops you have to jump through to get back in there that aren't there, if you're there to begin with. So it was just this weird situation. So for me, it was more cool. I found it out, but now like it's such a big fight to get her back in there. So that's kind of how it went for us anyway.
yeah, yeah. It's not easy, especially when you're going into principals and stuff, and you're basically saying your educational system that you say is so great sucks for my kid.
Right. Well, and
Yeah,
the other big part for me was like I'm for like full inclusion, so it should be where, in my opinion, you start off trying to be in the general ed class, and if they need more supports, you kind of build them, and if that ends up being they need to go somewhere else, then so be it. But it shouldn't be like she's in a wheelchair, has multiple check marks for how she qualifies. Let's send her to this program. It should be how can we try it in general ed, see if we can be successful, adding stuff in, and then maybe backing off. But it shouldn't be initially boom, you're already segregated. That's just not right.
yeah, and it doesn't help the kids without disabilities
For sure.
learn how to deal with the kids that have
Yep.
disabilities because then um, I mean, there are different things. Different kids wear briefs, and
Yep.
sometimes if they have accidents in a classroom, like I did, the kids are going to be like, "What's that smell? I'm not used to that,"
Right.
And I've been caught in many embarrassing situations like that, and it's just because kids aren't taught. At least when I was growing up, kids weren't taught how to, you know,
Right.
handle someone with a disability We don't laugh at their misfortune if they have an accident and they go to the bathroom
Sure.
and it's something that they can't control.
Yep.
You know, we don't make them feel uncomfortable and awkward because they're already feeling that already because they're embarrassed. You know, so yeah.
So it sounds like you grew up in the church a lot if you went there and went to school there. So I grew up Baptist and we went to church
Yep.
like every time the doors were open.
Yep.
I mean, for me, I have my daughter's born, and then there's some things that we were always taught a lot. Like if you have the faith of a mustard seed, you can move mountains, and then just
Yep.
different things they throw out, and then all of a sudden you have something in your life where you can't fix it, and you're praying, and it's not going away. Do you ever
Yeah.
have any stuff from like your religious upbringing that kind of doesn't make sense to you, or it's hard to like you know make it work out?
Oh yeah, yeah, and I would encourage your listeners or viewers, depending on how you're listening to this, if you're drinking something right now, put it down because I don't want you to spit it out on my account. Uh, so that's interesting you brought that up because I just did a podcast episode about this. It was like
Okay.
my second episode, and I talked about a lot of the things that we're talking about, like not being included in youth activities, church leaders
Sure.
ignoring me, all that stuff. And one of the things I hate as being a disabled Christian is for some reason the pastors, the ministers feel led to use people with disabilities as sermon illustrations and call them out in church and say what an inspiration we are, or say that, God's using us and we're going to get extra rewards because we're disabled, and we're not victims, we're victorious, and all that stuff. Well, one Sunday morning, my pastor was preaching a sermon, and for whatever reason, we had a term in our church. I don't know who coined it. I hate it to this day. We had a term in our church called Wheelchair Alley, where it was one place where everybody in wheelchairs sat in the church.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know who coined that term. I hate it. I can't say that enough. But so it was me and then a bunch of adult men who were like paralyzed and had various accidents which caused them to be in a wheelchair. Anyway, the pastor would like to use us as sermon illustrations. So he was talking about fiery trials, and for those of you who are of the Christian faith, I'm sure you've heard of Job or Achan or people like
Mm-hmm.
that who have went through fiery trials. And so for some reason the pastor went through the whole list of names of the people in wheelchairs and said, you have this trial right now, but don't worry about it. You're going to be in heaven, and I just want you to know you're such an inspiration, and blah, blah, blah. Well, when he got to me, for some reason, he screamed at me, and he screamed my name, and he was like, Nick, your wheelchair's a prison, and God says deal with it. And then just went on talking. Like nothing happened. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. I was in my early to mid 20s at the time.
Right.
I may have been 18 at the time because it was right after my senior year of high school, probably 2010, 2011. So probably in my first adult years as an adult, 18, 19, early 20s. And that hit me like a ton of bricks because I was already struggling with, I never got to hang out with friends and be quote unquote normal, and I'm using air quotes.
Yep.
Never got to be hung out with friends and be normal. And so I was already struggling with that. I didn't have a really good relationship with my parents because I feel like a lot of parents struggle connecting with their special needs child, especially if you're a dad. What I've experienced, men in general like to fix things. When you can't fix something, it's very frustrating. So
Right.
My dad and I have always struggled with our relationship, so I was dealing with that. And of course, where I grew up, you were always taught that the man in the house is a picture of God. So here I am, always, struggling with my relationship with my earthly father. And then I'm told in front of
Right.
thousands of people on a Sunday morning that this heavenly father who is supposed to love me and be all loving and accepts me for who I am says to this pastor, "Your wheelchair's a prison, Nick," and God says, "Deal with it."
Right.
So how am I supposed to what am I supposed to do with that? So I struggled with that for years, and
Yeah.
I hope I'm not rambling here. I'm sorry.
No, that's
But,
great.
um,
I'm making a mental note that we should probably either record another one on mine or with you or something. Have one just like talking about religion stuff because I feel like we could go for hours about
oh my
all
God,
the things that. I mean, the other thing that comes to mind that I mean, I could talk for 20 minutes about this is just the whole like when you die, you go to heaven and you have like a perfect body, and I'm like sitting here like I view my daughter as being perfect the way she is. So why is she? You know what I mean? If she's creating God's image and all that stuff, and she's perfect just the way she is here for me. Like, why are you telling me she's going to have a quote unquote perfect body and she's going to be totally different? She's going to be able to run and do all this stuff, which she can't do now. Is what you're going to have a perfect body is kind of they talk about. So like for me, it's like how do you? My brain can't handle that because I'm like she's perfect now. No, she's not. So that whole thing too.
Well, and I actually do believe that, and I think what they say when they mean by that is, no disease, no cancer, no tears, no
Right.
losing people. I don't think that they're insinuating that down here your daughter or I am a freak, and once she gets up to heaven,
Right.
she's going to be fixed. I think what they're saying is once she gets up to heaven, she's not going to have to deal with the wonderful thing that is supposed to be the ADA and
Right.
whether, there are
Yeah.
handicap spots to park.
Right.
She's not going to have to worry about that because there is going to be no such thing in heaven as a handicapped or a
Right.
disability because in heaven, everything will be perfect. So,
Yeah.
yes, I am someone, even though I've had quote religious trauma, I am someone who deeply believes in an afterlife and who deeply believes in heaven and who deeply believes that there's something way better than
Right.
this crappy thing called Earth and crappy thing. And I'm a very positive person, so don't
Right.
think that I'm just shitting on life. But there is such a thing as better than this life, and it's up in heaven, and it's the
Yeah.
afterlife. And yeah.
Awesome. My next question I want to ask is my second. I've done two TEDx talks. My second one, I talk about how we can use empathy to be more inclusive. How do you think we can use empathy to be more inclusive?
Well, first of all, we can talk about how we don't use it, and it's not a proverbial pat on the head saying, "Oh, there,
Right.
you're so cute, you're so adorable." Um, I think we can use empathy if we could have everybody, and this thought just popped in my head. If you have nobody with a disability in your life, which I find it
Right.
hard to imagine nowadays, if you have nobody with a disability in your life at all, before you go to a store or before you go to a restaurant and you see a disabled person struggle, you should be able to say, how would I feel, especially if you're in a place of power. You should be able to say, how would I feel if I had a disabled family member? How would I want them to be treated? How would I want people to look at them? Do I want them to look at them as this poor individual who doesn't have a life? Or do I want them to look at this person and say, wow, in spite of everything that they've gone through, they have a great outlook on life. All we can use empathy in that way. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, for sure.
But we can use empathy in so many different ways, especially when we're building buildings. Not just to build it to ADA standards. The ADA is as old as I am. It's 34 years old.
Yeah.
And it's still not where it needs to be. I think as long as it's ADA compliant and a person can physically get in a building, then it's okay because they're a part of it. Yeah, well, if a person like me comes in with a 300-pound chair and tries to turn around in your narrow shop and knocks over half the stuff and breaks half of it because there's not enough room to turn around,
Yeah.
it's not really ADA compliant, is it?
Right. No, that's a great point about, the ADA is everybody, well, people think it because there's ADA everything's fine, but it's not fine. So, yeah, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done for sure.
It's not. And if everybody kind of just, you talk about how can we include everybody? Well, figure out a way, say, okay, if I had a disabled brother or a disabled sister, force yourself to be in that mindset if you're not.
Yeah.
Because look at it. At the end of the day, you all who are not disabled now are going to become disabled at some point.
Yep.
You're either going to end up in a hospital somewhere for a period of time and you may be in a wheelchair for 6 months to a year, or God forbid, you may be that way the rest of your life and you can't wait until that time happens and be like, wow, I never realized. That's why you need to realize it now. So when you get to that point, it's not, oh, we have to figure this shit out now.
For sure.
So,
yeah. What's one tip you can share to help our listeners today to be more inclusive? Not something where we have to pay money to do it or like train to do it, just something practical everybody can do today to be more inclusive.
Well, I specifically, Aaron, want to talk about, children in school. If you know of someone, if you're playing a game of, let's just say, because this happened to me, if you're playing a game of Heads Up 7-Up and you see someone that's in a wheelchair that's not participating, adapt that game so that they can participate. Offer to push them around so they can poke their friends with a pen and be a part of Heads Up 7-Up, or offer to, run them around the bases if they're playing a game of baseball, and of course, don't ever just automatically do something for someone with a disability without asking, hey, do you need help with that? Because a lot of people are very independent that have disabilities and they don't always want to be helped all the time. So be sure to always ask. But, just to be sure, just ask them, especially if they're in school and you're involved in an activity that they're not involved in. Hey, how can we get this person that's in a wheelchair involved? Or how can we get this person that has Down syndrome involved and make them feel a part? And just being kind to someone in a wheelchair or someone that has less than you, maybe they're not even disabled. Just being kind to somebody is free and it doesn't cost any money.
Yeah, for sure.
And even if it does, if it is simple as buying someone a donut, and saying, hey, I see you, I hear you, and I'm glad you're here.
I love that.
That can change somebody's life.
For sure. Is there anything you want to talk about that we haven't discussed?
Yes, I would love to talk about the reason why I started my podcast, which is Nick Speaks. And I launched it a few weeks ago. And I am so excited. We are launching by this time, the time the episode airs. I don't know when this episode is going to air, But by the time this episode airs, probably episode 5 or 6 will be up. I launch episode 4 today, and it's called the Nick Speaks Podcast, where we speak up, speak out, and speak loud for those that are in the disabled community, and give those in the disabled community a voice who feel that they don't have one. So I will be doing interviews with caregivers. I did an interview with a caregiver that's coming out today, actually. It's been out since 7 o'clock this morning. And I'll do interviews with parents. Plus, I'll do monologues, and you'll hear my story about my religious experience that I talked about here today. And really, the purpose of my podcast is to get public speaking engagements, because I've been told by 2 states and 3 different counties that I'm unemployable because of my disabilities. Really, I think it's because people are lazy and they don't want to think outside the box. But so I am looking to start my own business into public speaking, and I'm giving several speeches at the Ohio State House on behalf of caregivers getting more pay. So if anybody wants to go listen to Nick Speaks, it is on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and it's also on my YouTube channel at Nicolas Comstock. So
that's great. You ready for the last question?
Oh, yes, I'm ready.
Do you eat Spam?
No. I think I was ready for this question because I've heard you ask. I've heard you ask it a couple different times. No, I don't eat Spam, and I would love to know why the hell you asked that question, but I don't eat Spam. I think it's disgusting. No, I haven't tried it, and no, I don't plan to.
Well, the reason I ask it is I live in Austin, Minnesota, which is where Hormel's from, and they make Spam. So there's a Spam museum here. So if you ever get to Austin, Minnesota, you can go visit the Spam museum.
Yeah, so, if I'm really bored and there's nothing else to do in Austin.
Hey, it's a huge thing in Hawaii. People come from Hawaii and all over the world to visit the Spam museum.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
It's really that big. Okay, Austin, Minnesota. I see you. Okay.
I mean, I have not been to Hawaii, but I've heard from other people that have been there or live there. Like you go to like McDonald's. Sometimes some places have it on the menu. Like a lot of places have Spam on the menu. They love it in Hawaii.
Ew. Okay.
That's why I ask it.
Yeah, I also want to say one more thing.
Yeah.
If I can get the vision of Spam out of my head. I also want to say one more thing. If anybody wants to email me to be on my podcast or anything,
sure.
As far as speaking engagements, my email for that is Nick, N-I-C-K, speaksofficial@gmail.com. Nick Speaks Official at gmail.com. So go ahead and email me if you want me to be a guest on your podcast or your YouTube show, or you want to talk about being a guest on mine. I'll send you my scheduling link and we'll set something up. So I would love to.
That's great. Well, thank you very much for being on my show today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Aaron.
Yeah. To all of you listening, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Inclusive Dad Podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, rate, or review the show. Your feedback helps us connect with more champions of inclusion. Remember to share this podcast with friends and family who might benefit. If you want to support us in our mission, please click on the link in the show description. Together we can make the world more inclusive. Until next time, stay empowered and be a champion for inclusion.